Hi everybody, today we're going to be talking about parental rights, specifically pertaining to families with students who have an exceptionality. So we need to know those parental rights as educators. My name is Brittany Powers and I'll be leading us through this talk. So first, we have to acknowledge that a parent is the most responsible party in determining a child's upbringing. A parent is the closest relative to a child and a student, and oftentimes they have affection for their own children, and because of this, a parent is a natural advocate for that student throughout the course of their elementary, middle school, and high school educations, and sometimes further on as well. It's also important to acknowledge the legal definition of what a parent can be. So a parent can be a biological parent, an adoptive parent, a person acting as a parent, a legal guardian, an officially appointed education advocate, or a foster parent. Now, not all times is a foster parent an officially appointed education advocate, so it is important to determine that early on if you do have a student who's a foster child in your classroom or under your care. Parents do have roles in their child's education. They get to act as fellow decision makers concerning a child's eligibility in receiving SPED services. They give their consent in whether or not their child receives an evaluation, or later down the road, if their needs are not being met with their current IEP, they get to consent for a reevaluation, or sometimes push for that to take place. Parents are also fellow decision makers in the IEP development process because they know their child and they have very specific helpful insights about their child that can assist the IEP team developing a solid plan for that student. The school is responsible for notifying parents of any IEP meetings in advance, and the school has to ensure that the parents are able to attend. So they have to do whatever possible to make sure that parents can be there, and sometimes be accommodating in that process, even if it means parents are joining via phone call or video call. Educators are also responsible for providing parents with their specific rights. So schools have to provide parents with a written version of their legal rights once a year at the very least. Parents are also able to request their rights, and if they do, schools have to provide the rights again. If there is a disciplinary situation where a student is expelled or suspended, the school has to provide parents with their legal rights. And of course, if a parent is unhappy with the process or with the services their child is receiving or not receiving, and they file a complaint, the school again is responsible for providing the parents with their legal rights in that situation. Schools must ensure parents understand the terms of the written IEP. They also are responsible for providing interpreters in a situation that would be necessary. So again, it's very important that parents are involved in that IEP process and understand all the terms that are settled on and agreed upon in the meeting. Parents of students with exceptionalities also have the right to be involved with school improvement processes. So sometimes parents might be involved in a design capacity where they're actually giving input and helping educators design school improvement plans. A lot of times their input can be really helpful. They can be on a team where they're responsible for evaluating new school processes and determining if it's effective or successful. Again, their input is very valuable, and when it's appropriate, parents can even be involved in supporting those improvement plans. Now, each state is specific about what rights a parent has. But in Kansas, we have our own parental rights laid out. And the first is parents are able to at any time examine their child's IEP records and go over that. So anytime they want access to that, they're able to request it if they don't have it. They're also able to obtain a separate evaluation. So if they receive an evaluation through the school with the psychologist and the team there, and they want a second opinion, they're able to go to a medical professional outside of the public school system and get a different evaluation. Parents also have access to a fair and appropriate public education, free and appropriate public education, regardless of what their exceptionality is. Parents also have the right to receive written prior notice related to the issue of any changes in education provisions. So if the team feels that a change is necessary in the student's education plan or in their IEP, parents have to be notified of that change and give their consent to it. Parents are able to complain if they feel unhappy or dissatisfied with the plan in place, or if they're feeling like their child isn't being properly cared for, or if the education plan isn't actually being carried out according to what was written and decided upon in the IEP. Parents can complain. They can also request mediation along for that process. Other parental rights include giving consent or refusal of consent. That's a big one. So an educator can bring up concerns they have with the child and recommend that their child is evaluated, but parents can turn that down and refuse to give their consent. And in that case, the school does not have permission to conduct any tests on their student. I actually had a situation this past year where that very thing happened. We had a student who we were really worried about, who was not progressing at all with every accommodation being provided, and we brought it up at multiple problem solving meetings at our school, and unanimously every person who worked with this child was extremely concerned, and the parents refused to give their consent for an evaluation. And so it's been 3 years of parents hearing the recommendations of an evaluation from the school and from the education professionals, and they continued to refuse to give their consent in this area. And so this child has yet to be evaluated and continues to struggle, which is really sad. But parents are in charge of their students' upbringing, and they do have that right to turn it down. Moving on to number 8, parents have the right to be joint members in decision making. So again, they're sitting in those IEP meetings and their voices matter. Number 9, parents can request a due process hearing if they are unhappy with the way things are going. They can take that a step further by appealing to the state or the federal court if their process hearing is unsuccessful. They can again take it another step further. Here I'm at number 11, and appeal to, I skipped this first one. The next step would actually be they take it to the state board, and then if that's unsuccessful and they want to keep fighting for this issue, they then take it to the state and federal court. If they are successful in any of these hearings, they have the right to recover any attorney fees that they paid out along that process. Here are some things that parent consent is required for. So parent consent is very important to obtain in the moving forward and continuation of building IEPs or getting students qualified for SPED services. So we need parent consent for an initial evaluation. Later down the road, if the child needs to be reevaluated, again, we need that parent consent to be able to do that. Once evaluations happen and the school team has a recommendation of IEP services and the parents have agreed, before we can actually provide those IEP services, we also have to have parent consent to start moving forward with that plan. Along the way, if we suggest or feel that any significant placement changes need to happen, again, we need parent consent to move forward with that. So parents have a huge voice in their child's education. We also need parent consent to add or delete a service. So if we need to add something on, or we feel like a student has kind of graduated and they no longer have need of a service in their IEP plan, before we can add or take anything away, we need parents' consent for that. If there is an IEP meeting and one of the team members from the meeting they need to be absent for some reason, you need parent consent for that person to be excused. If the school feels that they need to involve an outside agency, we need parent consent. Or before we can use Medicaid or private insurance, we need parent consent as well. Now, students who are gifted in the state of Kansas are also considered to have an exceptionality. So gifted students are also considered special education students in the state of Kansas. However, there are some minor differences in terms, and some of these are laid out on the next slide. So gifted students, one difference is they don't have disciplinary protections. So students with exceptionalities or disabilities, they do have some disciplinary protection. So before any discipline can be implemented at a school level, it has to be determined that the behavior was not due to their exceptionality or their disability. If it is related to that at all, then different measures need to be taken and a different team needs to be included in the decision-making process. They can still be disciplined, but it just takes longer and more people have to be involved, and you have to be very careful that you're being fair. Going back to gifted students, children under the age of 5 are not eligible to be considered, not just yet. Students who are gifted are not eligible for an extended school year. So some students with disabilities, that's something that can be added to their IEP. And not gifted students, that's not something that we offer. And very similar to that, least restrictive environments is not a primary consideration when considering an IEP plan for a gifted student. They do try to set them up for success, of course, but oftentimes that's not really an issue in their journey. Here are my references. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this has been informative and that you have a better understanding of what a parent's rights are, especially when you have a family member or family members who have students with exceptionalities. It's really important for educators to have a strong understanding of what's expected of us. That way we can avoid any sticky situations and really serve our families best.